Hey everyone, Mr. Phantom Knight here. Before we dive into today's story, I just want to remind you to hit that subscribe button if you enjoy these chilling tales. Today, we've got a story from a subscriber named Ethan. What he experienced is deeply unsettling, and it's a reminder that sometimes the real horrors in life don't come from the supernatural, but from the darkest corners of human nature. Here's Ethan's story. Dear Mr. Phantom Knight, I've been a subscriber of your channel, and I never thought I'd have a story of my own to share. I'm not sure if what I'm about to tell you qualifies as a horror story in the traditional sense, but it's something that still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. This is a true story, and it's something I've never really talked about with anyone until now. My name is Ethan, and I'm originally from a small town in the Midwest. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, and nothing much ever happens. At least, that's what I used to think. I've since moved away, but I'll never forget what happened the summer I turned 17. Our town was surrounded by dense woods, and as kids we were always warned not to venture too far in. There were rumors about strange things happening out there, disappearances, animal sacrifices, that kind of thing. But we were teenagers, and of course, we thought we were invincible. One night, my friends and I decided to go camping in the woods. We'd done it a few times before, but this time, we planned to go deeper than we'd ever gone. We were looking for thrills, something to break up the monotony of small-town life. We got more than we bargained for. It was a sweltering summer night when we set out with our backpacks full of supplies, flashlights in hand, and excitement buzzing in the air. The woods were dense and humid, the kind of place where the trees seemed to press in on you from all sides. But we were laughing, joking around, confident that we'd have a good time. We walked for what felt like hours, pushing further and further into the forest until the familiar sounds of the town were replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of night birds. Finally, we found a spot to set up camp, a small clearing surrounded by towering trees that seemed to reach up and disappear into the dark sky. We pitched our tents, built a fire, and settled in for the night. As the flames crackled and cast dancing shadows across the trees, we started telling ghost stories, just for fun, we thought. One of my friends, Tom, was a master storyteller. He spun tales about the haunted woods, about people who had gone missing, and about strange rituals performed by secret cults. We laughed, but there was an edge of unease in the air. Maybe it was just the darkness, the isolation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the shadows. It was around midnight when we first heard the chanting. We were sitting around the campfire, listening to Tom's latest story, when the sound of low, rhythmic voices started drifting through the trees. At first, we thought it was just the wind, but then it grew louder, more distinct. The voices were speaking in some kind of language none of us recognized. We all exchanged nervous glances, but no one wanted to admit they were scared. So we decided to check it out. We grabbed our flashlights and started walking toward the sound. The deeper we went into the woods, the louder the chanting became. It was unnerving. There was something almost hypnotic about it. After about 10 minutes of walking, we reached a clearing. What we saw there will haunt me for the rest of my life. In the middle of the clearing was a circle of people, all wearing dark robes with hoods that obscured their faces. They were standing around a large stone altar, on which lay what looked like a person. The chanting grew louder, more frantic, and I realized with horror that the person on the altar was struggling against their restraints. We were frozen in place, unable to move, barely able to breathe. The air was thick with the smell of something burning, incense maybe, or something worse. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Suddenly, one of the robed figures looked up and directly at us. I don't know how, but I knew they could see us, even in the dark. They didn't say anything, didn't move, but somehow the chanting stopped all at once. The silence was deafening. Without thinking, we turned and ran. I don't remember much of the run back, only that the trees seemed to close in on us, the branches scratching at our faces and arms like they were trying to hold us back. When we finally burst out of the woods and into the safety of the road, we didn't stop running until we reached my friend's house. We never spoke about what we saw that night, not to each other and certainly not to anyone else. But after that, things in our town started to change. There were more reports of people going missing, animals being found mutilated, and the woods, well, no one goes in there anymore. I moved away as soon as I could, but I still think about that night. I wonder who those people were, what they were doing, and what might have happened if we hadn't run. I'll never know for sure, but I do know one thing. Some things are better left undiscovered. After we ran out of the woods that night, we made a pact. We swore that none of us would ever speak of what we saw. We didn't want anyone to think we were crazy, and besides, who would believe us? The next day, we acted like nothing had happened, but I could tell we were all on edge. Every time a car passed by or the phone rang, I jumped. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events in my head, trying to make sense of it all. Who were those people? What were they doing in the middle of the woods? And most importantly, why were they there? I knew deep down that something was seriously wrong, but I didn't know what to do about it. As the days passed, I started to notice strange things happening around town. People started disappearing without a trace. First, it was a girl from my school. Then, a neighbor down the street. And then, one by one, more and more people vanished. The police were baffled, and rumors began to spread. Some people said they had seen strange lights in the sky. Others claimed to have heard strange noises coming from the woods at night. But no one knew for sure what was happening. I tried to push the thoughts out of my mind, but it was impossible. I couldn't stop thinking about that night in the woods and what we had seen. I couldn't help but feel like we had stumbled upon something we weren't supposed to see, something dangerous. I was terrified that whatever was out there was going to come after us. One night, about a week after the incident, I was lying in bed when I heard a noise outside my window. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone was tapping on the glass. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and listened. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming from right outside my window. I slowly got out of bed and walked over to the window, my hands shaking. I pulled back the curtain and peered outside, but there was nothing there, just the dark, empty street. But then I saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the woods, just barely visible in the darkness. It was tall and thin, and its eyes seemed to glow with an eerie red light. I blinked, and it was gone. My heart was racing, and I quickly closed the curtain, backing away from the window. I didn't sleep at all that night, too afraid that the figure would come back. The next morning, I told my friends about what I had seen. They were just as freaked out as I was, but we didn't know what to do. We were just kids after all. We couldn't go to the police. They wouldn't believe us. And besides, we had made a pact not to tell anyone. But things only got worse from there. Over the next few weeks, more and more strange things started happening. I would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of chanting coming from the woods. My friends reported seeing strange lights in the sky and hearing strange noises outside their windows. And always there was that feeling of being watched, like something was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, I was walking home from a friend's house when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. I kept walking, but the footsteps continued, getting closer and closer. I started to run, my heart pounding in my chest, but no matter how fast I ran, the footsteps kept pace with me. I finally reached my house, burst through the front door, and slammed it shut behind me. I was out of breath, my hands shaking, but when I looked out the window, there was nothing there. just the dark, empty street. But that night, I had a nightmare. In the dream, I was back in the woods, standing in the clearing where we had seen the robed figures. The chanting was loud, almost deafening, and I could feel something pulling me toward the altar. I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, unable to escape. The robed figures turned to look at me, their faces hidden in shadow, but I could feel their eyes on me, boring into my soul. And then, one of them stepped forward, pulling back his hood to reveal a face I recognized. It was Tom, my friend, the one who had told us the ghost stories that night. But his eyes were different, cold and empty, like he wasn't really there. He reached out a hand, and as he touched my shoulder, I woke up, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. I didn't tell my friends about the dream. I didn't want to scare them even more. But deep down, I knew that something was terribly wrong. I started avoiding the woods, even in the daytime. I would take the long way home from school, just to avoid walking by the edge of the forest. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me. Then, one day, Tom went missing. He didn't show up for school, and his parents didn't know where he was. They called the police, but there was no trace of him. He had just vanished, like the others. My friends and I were devastated, but we didn't know what to do. We were scared, confused, and powerless. It felt like the world was falling apart around us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I kept thinking about that night in the woods, about the robed figures and the chanting. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had somehow caused all of this, that we had unleashed something we couldn't control. I was filled with a sense of dread, like something terrible was about to happen. And then, in the middle of the night, I heard it, the chanting. It was coming from outside, from the direction of the woods. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and listened. The chanting was growing louder, more insistent. I knew I should stay inside, lock the doors, and hide under the covers. But something was pulling me toward the sound, like I was being drawn by an invisible force. I got out of bed and walked to the window. The chanting was louder now, almost deafening. I could see the edge of the woods from my window, and there in the darkness, I saw the figures again. The robed figures, standing in a circle, their faces hidden in shadow. They were chanting, their voices rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern that made my skin crawl. And then, I saw him, Tom. He was standing in the middle of the circle, his face blank, his eyes empty. He looked like he was in a trance, like he wasn't really there. I watched in horror as one of the robed figures stepped forward, holding something in his hands. It was a knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight. He raised the knife, and I screamed, but no sound came out. I wanted to run, to do something, but I was frozen in place, unable to move. And then, just as the knife was about to come down, everything went black. I must have fainted, because the next thing I remember, I was lying on the floor of my room, my head pounding, my heart racing. I looked out the window, but there was nothing there. The chanting was gone, the figures were gone, and the woods were silent once again. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if it was real, or if it was just a nightmare. But after that, I couldn't stay in that town anymore. I convinced my parents to let me move away, to start fresh in a new place. I never told them why, never told anyone about what I saw. But I know one thing for sure, I'll never forget that summer, and I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, of being hunted by something I couldn't see. Now, years later, I still think about it sometimes. I wonder what happened to Tom, to the others who went missing. I wonder if they ever found their way back, or if they're still out there, lost in the woods, caught in some kind of nightmare that never ends. I try not to dwell on it too much, but it's hard. Some things just stay with you, no matter how much time passes. Thanks for reading my story, Mr. Phantom Knight. I hope it wasn't too disturbing. Keep doing what you're doing, Your channel is a lifeline for people like me who have seen things they can't explain. And if anyone else out there has had a similar experience, know that you're not alone. There are things out there that we can't understand, things that defy explanation. But sometimes, just knowing that someone else has been through it too can make all the difference. Wow, Ethan, that was truly chilling. Thank you for trusting us with your story. It's tales like yours that remind us how thin the veil between the ordinary and the terrifying can be. For everyone watching, if you've had an experience that still keeps you up at night, don't hesitate to share it with us. You never know, it might just be the next story we feature here. Stay safe out there, and remember, the darkness isn't always empty. Until next time, keep your lights on, and don't forget to subscribe.